Hey there, and welcome to this update on my BigDelta 3D printer. So this is probably what I would consider the third iteration of the printer, but it's not really an iteration, it's a growing living thing and it changes over time. But a few significant things have changed this time. When I moved to my new place here, we were in a bit of a hurry, so we just took the 3D printer out of my old apartment and laid it down outside. And I made sure to rest the print head on the floor of the trailer we were driving it in, so that it wouldn't be moving. But apparently that wasn't enough. I should have just done looking back, I should have done the very easy thing, and I should have just unplugged the stepper drivers. But I didn't, so the stepper drivers died on my smoothie board. Now, I could have just put on external drivers, or if I wanted to, used hot air and replaced the drivers on that board, but for a while I wanted to try out quieter trinamic drivers, and I was looking at making a small board because I wanted it to be neat. I didn't want it to just be a mess of wires connecting off to some external drivers. I wanted to have a proper board with the external drivers on, and when I looked at costs, the $100 Duet Maestro pre-order price looked pretty good to me. So I decided to go with the Duet Maestro and pre-ordered it when it was 2 months before launch. And that was fine. 2 months afterwards it shipped as promised, and then customs decided that apparently they've gotten a new software or whatever, they've gotten a new system for handling taxes, and it's broken as all hell. So it took a month. Well, they usually take a few days to get through customs. So it was 3 months. It was past summer vacation, and it's now normal work days again. But I had a few weekends and I have it up and running again. So that is the one huge change. It's in a new apartment and it now is running a Duet Maestro. So it is now a lot quieter. You can probably still hear the steppers if I shut up, but you will still mostly be able to hear the fans. Now in my new apartment, I sleep not right next to the printer as I used to. I sleep over there, a good 5 meters, 4 meters, something like that, behind a wall. So if it wasn't for the fans, this would actually be super quiet. As it is, I have slept a few times with the printing, and that actually works fine now. Earlier, if I wanted to do that, I would have to move my bed, because otherwise, if I stretched, I would kick the printer. And that was fine when it wasn't moving or anything, but if I kick this frame right here, oh wow, this frame here, if I kick that while it's printing, I'm sure it'll give some shits and worse print quality. Not to mention, sleeping right next to it with normal Allegro drivers, it was super loud. So yeah, now it actually works pretty well. And it's pretty quiet. It's really nice, actually. So let's go over what this printer is, because I do only want to leave up one video at a time. I don't want to have like a chain of update videos. So this is the BigDelta. It is a BigDelta 3D printer. Surprise, surprise. It's designed by Thews, T-H-E-W-S, but it is a self-sourced printer. Thews is from the US and I am not, so I made a separate bill of materials. You can find that on the GitHub for this printer. However, there are a few things you will have to make yourself. Obviously you'll have to 3D print the corners yourself and the carriages. But also the extruder has, we call it the tube extruder, and that is because there is about this long of a tube in there. Capillary tube it's called. Actually I have one. Okay, yeah, I have one. I'll just be very professional and leave you for a little bit while I find it. So this is the kind of tube. You cut that down to 40 millimeters. No? Yeah, there we go. Cut that down to 4 millimeters, and then in the middle you slot out half of it, and that serves as the idler, and that sits in that tube down there. So you'll have to make that tube yourself. If anyone are interested in making that extruder, I can ship you some. I made 20 of them out on the hackerspace in the mill, and I'm happy I made a lot because the mill is currently out of commission. So yeah, if you want to make them yourself, that's also not a big problem. If you just have to make one, you can just go at it with a file, and that's fine. Yeah, so that's the tube extruder. The problem with this extruder though is that it uses a Deesmaker Tatsu V2 hopped bolt or hopped gear or whatever, and though they no longer sell those, so yeah, you might be able to get some if you shoot them an email. I've heard some people had luck with that, but yeah, it is a dated design by now. It's a few years old for me, 2, 3, maybe 4 years. No, it's not. I think it's 3 years old. But yeah, so the bed diameter is 500 millimeters, and I have a usable 400 millimeters bed diameter, and that's mainly because otherwise it hits the wall. And it's just, I like having the bit of the edge on it because then I don't have to line up the bed that precise, which is nice. I just throw the bed on, run a calibration, and then take the probe off. So it's 500 millimeter or 400 millimeter usable diameter, and the print height is probably somewhere around 600 or 700 millimeters. The printer itself is 1.5 meters tall, and yeah. What more? Well, when I upgraded the Duet, I decided to go for a 24 volt part fan instead of a 12 volt, and a 5 volt cold end fan. That's the fan you can actually see down there. So right there's the 5 volt fan, and then over here is the 24 volt fan. But that meant where I usually ran 2 12 volt fans, I now had 2 different voltage fans, so I had to run a separate cable. So I decided to make the hot end hot swappable, kind of, at least electrically, by putting a connector on. And that is just a TE connectivity made in lock. Whoa! Whew. Very professional. Wow, okay. Yeah, so it's a TE connectivity made in lock. It is a clone of Molex Microfed, but they were easy to get for me. So yeah, at some point I'm probably gonna go over and use the infrared probe. I actually have one, but it's in the hackerspace in my locker out there. Because now that I have a Duet that actually supports analog range measurement with that probe, which should be pretty neat. Yeah, so I think I talked about everything. It's BigDelta, it now runs Duet. I guess I didn't mention much about the extruder other than the front end of it, but it's running a NEMA 11 motor with 27 to 1 gear reduction, which means the step rate is actually the main limiting factor for that driver. But that's fine, I'm running it at 4th microstepping, and that's still good. So yeah, I can't really say any more about it. It's a really big 3D printer, and oh yeah, I did have one point I wanted to touch on. Why do you want such a big 3D printer? It's fun. It's probably the #1 reason. And if you can't go along with that, well, then it's probably not for you, because it does have its drawbacks. But that's the thing about hobbies. They don't always have to make 100% sense. But also because I have a defect in my print bed down there. I'm waiting for my second bed. We can turn around and show you. It's in the bathroom. So I use glue on it, but it takes a few days for that to dry. Well, it takes a day for it to set, and then a few more days for it to completely harden. And you can see that's a bit of a messy thing. You remove the layer. Well, other people do it differently, but this is what I do. You remove the previous glue, you put on new diluted glue, and you let it dry off, and then you have a very nice flat surface. And it's currently dripping a bit still, but it's slow enough that I don't worry about it. But yeah, so yeah, it's big enough that even though I have a bit missing in the middle because I printed too close and had to remove that, and it pulled glue off with it. Even though that's an issue, I can still print 2 of those pretty big 7 segments and just avoid the hole in the middle. And yeah, I really don't design. When I do 3D printed designs, I never really worry about having the space for it. I just make my design, and then when it's time to print, it usually always fits. and that's really nice. That, however, does mean that usually you want the XY space. The height I've actually never used. I think the tallest thing I've printed was 350 millimeters tall, 400 maybe, I'm not sure. But again, if I wanted to, I could just print something absolutely huge. I did print a 1 kilogram rocket model, but oh well, it was 700 grams. But it wasn't too tall because I wanted to use supports in it. Looking back, I shouldn't have. It increased the print duration a lot as well. But you have it, you're not limited, you don't have to think about it. Now, if you're not careful, that does mean that you might not make the best designs. If you don't have limitations, you usually aren't thinking enough about what you could do differently. But that's not really the case here either, because I'm lazy. I don't want to properly tram out that bed. I just throw it on there and then I run a calibration. But that does mean that it's a bit more sensitive to when you're printing big prints like this. Like this was a bit of a chore getting started. Mostly because this is actually PETG. It's the only black filament I have. And you need to print pretty good first layers with that on a colder bed. But it works. But over big prints, you can't rely on just having it calibrated a few days ago. You have to run a calibration then not home. I mean, I could probably home, but if you do not home, you have the fresh calibration and it's better. You get more consistency over the large bed. So I do try to avoid making them too large unless I have to. But yeah, it's fun. And it's a hobby. And it's a nice hobby to have, because while it's a fun hobby to have, you also get a really useful tool out of it. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching, and bye.